Michael slammed his laptop closed with such force I thought the screen would shatter. His face turned a shade of crimson I'd rarely witnessed in our 18 years of marriage. I had simply asked about the dwindling numbers in our joint savings account, our retirement fund that had mysteriously lost over $300,000 in the past few months. I never expected my simple question would lead to threats of divorce, the uncovering of a double life, and ultimately, the discovery of strength I never knew I possessed. "I was just checking our quarterly statement," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the sudden hostility. "Our retirement account is almost empty, Michael. $300,000 doesn't just disappear overnight. You're monitoring my spending now? Checking up on me behind my back?" He ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, pacing our kitchen like a caged animal. The granite countertops and stainless steel appliances we'd so carefully selected together during our kitchen renovation last year now felt cold and unfamiliar. "It's our joint account," I explained calmly, though my heart was racing. "I have every right to know where our retirement savings went. We've been putting money away for 15 years. "A right?" Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You haven't contributed significantly to those accounts in a decade. That money came from my salary, my bonuses at the firm." The words stung like a physical slap. I had given up my career as a marketing executive to raise our twin daughters, while Michael climbed the corporate ladder at Preston and Holden Financial Group. We had made that decision together when Emma and Olivia were born. One of us would stay home, and since Michael's earning potential was higher, it made financial sense for it to be me. It had been our mutual choice, our shared sacrifice for our family. "If you can't trust me with finances anymore, maybe we shouldn't be married," he continued, his voice suddenly cold and deliberate. "Maybe divorce is what we need here." I felt the blood drain from my face as the room seemed to tilt slightly. "Are you serious? After 18 years together, you'd throw our marriage away rather than simply explain where our retirement savings went?" Instead of answering, Michael grabbed his keys from the counter. "I need some space from these accusations. I'll be back when you've calmed down and are ready to apologize." Apologize? For asking about our financial future? I was dumbfounded. He was already heading for the door of our suburban Portland home. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. Don't try to contact me. I need time to think." The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through our suddenly too quiet house, leaving me standing alone in our kitchen, hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter for support. My name is Elizabeth Chen, 46 years old, and the life I thought I had, stable, secure, predictable, had just imploded in the span of 10 minutes. 2 teenage daughters about to start their college journeys. A husband of nearly 2 decades who had just threatened divorce rather than explain a vanished bank account. With trembling fingers, I unlocked my tablet and logged into our online banking again, hoping somehow I'd misread the numbers. But the balance remained the same. $32,576 in our retirement account that should have held over $340,000. As I scrolled through recent transactions, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. A series of wire transfers over the past 4 months, each one between $25,000 and $50,000, all sent to an account I didn't recognize under a name that made my blood run cold. Vanessa Winters. I stared at the name, trying to place it. Something about it seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't connect it to anyone in our social circle, or Michael's work colleagues. My hands trembled as I took screenshots of the transactions, documenting dates, amounts, and account details. Something told me I'd need this evidence. The kitchen suddenly felt too confining. I wandered into our living room where family photos lined the mantel. Michael and me on our wedding day, beaming with hope and promise. The twins at their Sweet 16 celebration last year. The 4 of us on our trip to Hawaii 3 summers. Ego. Had we been happy then, or was I just blind to whatever had been building beneath the surface? I sank onto our leather sofa, the same one we'd spent months debating before purchasing. It's an investment piece, Michael had insisted. Something that will last decades just like us. The irony wasn't lost on me now. The house was unnervingly quiet. The twins were at a weekend volleyball tournament in Seattle with their team. I had planned to use this rare alone time with Michael to discuss college financing options for the girls. Instead, I found myself facing the possibility that those carefully laid education plans might now be in jeopardy. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Staying at the Marriott tonight. Need space. Don't call." I felt a strange calm settling over me, displacing the initial shock. This wasn't just about money. Michael's reaction had been too extreme, too defensive. Something bigger was happening, and I needed to find out what before he returned to control the narrative. I walked up to our shared home office and sat at the computer. Michael and I had always maintained separate email accounts, but our password manager stored all our login credentials. I hesitated only briefly before accessing his email, something I'd never done in our marriage. The boundary violation made me uncomfortable, but his reaction to a simple question about our finances had shattered my trust completely. His inbox revealed nothing immediately suspicious, mostly work correspondence and newsletters. But a folder labeled Property Investments caught my attention. Inside were dozens of emails exchanged with someone named Vanessa, dating back nearly 8 months. The earliest emails were professional, discussing potential real estate opportunities. But as I scanned forward through the timeline, the tone changed dramatically. "Can't wait to see you again," one message read. "Our condo is coming together beautifully," said another from just 2 weeks ago. Our condo. The words hammered at me. Attached to one email was a PDF of closing documents for a beachfront condominium in San Diego, purchased 4 months ago for $850,000. The buyers listed were Michael Chen and Vanessa Winters. I felt physically ill. I printed the documents with shaking hands, then continued searching. In his cloud storage, I found photos, dozens of them, of Michael with a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. Platinum blonde hair, expertly applied makeup, designer, clothes. In some, they were dining at upscale restaurants. In others, lounging on a balcony with an ocean view. In several, she wore an expensive-looking diamond bracelet I'd never seen before, though I recognized the distinctive blue box from Tiffany's that had appeared on our credit card statement last Valentine's Day. A gift Michael had claimed was lost in transit. The timestamp on the most recent photo was just last weekend, when Michael had told me he was at a financial planning conference in San Diego. The location tag confirmed my suspicions: Coronado Beach. My husband of 18 years, the father of my children, had been systematically draining our retirement funds to finance a relationship with another woman and a luxury property I knew nothing about. I sat back in the office chair, oddly calm despite the devastating evidence before me. The initial shock had given way to something else, a cold, calculated anger and determination I'd never experienced before. Michael hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd stolen our financial future and our daughter's college funds. My entire adult life had been built on trust and partnership with this man. Now I realized it had all been constructed on quicksand. Michael and I met during our senior year at Oregon State University. I was studying marketing with dreams of working for a major advertising agency. He was the ambitious finance major with a 5-year plan already mapped out. We literally bumped into each other at the campus coffee shop, causing me to spill my latte all over my economics textbook. He insisted on buying me a replacement book and coffee. By the end of that study session, I was charmed by his confidence, his clear vision for the future, and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a modest ceremony at his parents' backyard in Salem. Both of us were eager to build our careers first, so we agreed to wait on having children. I landed a position at Crawford & Pike Marketing, while Michael started as a junior analyst at Preston & Holden Financial Group. Those early years were both challenging and exhilarating. We lived in a small apartment in southeast Portland, saving every penny we could while climbing our respective career ladders. I still remember our Friday night tradition: $15 takeout budget, a bottle of $2 Chuck wine, and dreams shared over candlelight about the life we would build together. We'd sit on our secondhand couch and plan our future: the house we would buy, the family we would raise, the places we would travel. "We're going to have it all, Liz," Michael would say, raising his plastic cup of wine. The dream home, successful. Careers, beautiful children. But we'll never forget these days when all we had was each other and big dreams. By our 5th year of marriage, both our careers were flourishing. I had been promoted to senior account manager, handling some of the agency's biggest clients. Michael had moved up to portfolio manager at Preston and Holden, his natural charm and strategic thinking making him a favorite with wealthy clients. We purchased our first home, a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district, and began trying for a baby. When I became pregnant with twins, we were overjoyed but also faced with difficult decisions. Childcare for 2 infants would be astronomically expensive, and both our jobs demanded long hours and frequent travel. After weeks of discussion and financial calculations, we decided that one of us would put career aspirations on hold to focus on raising our daughters. Since Michael's income and growth potential at the financial firm significantly outpaced mine, it made practical sense for me to be the one to step back. "It's just temporary," Michael assured me as I tearfully submitted my resignation. "Once the girls are in school, you can go back. Your talent isn't going anywhere, Liz." Emma and Olivia were born on a rainy April morning, tiny, identical bundles with Michael's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. The early years were a blur of midnight feedings, first steps, and the beautiful chaos that comes with raising twins. Sometimes missed the creative challenges of my marketing career, but found new purpose in nurturing our daughters and managing our growing household. Michael's career continued its upward trajectory. By the time the twins turned 5, he had been promoted to senior investment advisor, working with high-net-worth clients and bringing home substantial bonuses. We upgraded to a larger home in the West Hills neighborhood of Portland, a beautiful craftsman with a spacious yard for the girls to play in and excellent schools nearby. "You made this possible," Michael would tell me, gesturing around our beautiful home during dinner parties. "While I'm pushing papers and chasing clients, you're raising our amazing daughters and creating this wonderful life. We're partners in every sense." I believed him. We were a team, Michael the breadwinner, me the foundation that kept our family strong and our home running smoothly. I managed our day-to-day finances, but Michael handled our investments and retirement planning. Leveraging his professional expertise, it seemed like a natural division of labor, and I trusted him completely. When the twins entered middle school, I began considering a return to the workforce. I took some online courses to update my skills and started doing freelance marketing, work for small local businesses. Michael was supportive, at least outwardly, though he often remarked how lucky we were that his income allowed me the luxury of working for fulfillment rather than necessity. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? We weathered the normal storms: disagreements about parenting approaches when the girls hit their difficult preteen years, stress when Michael's mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, tension during the housing market crash that temporarily affected his commissions. Through it all, I believed we were solid, a united front facing life's challenges together. The twins grew into remarkable young women. Now 17 and seniors in high school, Emma had inherited my creative streak and excelled in photography and digital arts, while Olivia showed Michael's aptitude for numbers and strategic thinking. Both were stellar volleyball players, with college recruiters already showing interest. We'd been diligently saving for their education since their birth, or so I thought. Last year, Michael and I celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary. He surprised me with a weekend getaway to Cannon Beach, where we walked along the shore discussing our next chapter once the girls left for college. "We should travel more," he suggested, picking up a sand dollar and handing it to me. Maybe get a small vacation property somewhere warm for winters. We've earned it after all these years of hard work. I treasured that weekend, believing it represented a strengthening of our bond as we prepared for our empty nest years. Now I wondered if he'd already been planning his escape even then, calculating how to finance his double life. Our social circle consisted mostly of other parents, from the girls' school and volleyball team, plus Michael's colleagues and their spouses. We hosted summer barbecues in our backyard and elegant holiday parties that Michael insisted were important for networking. I'd become expert at these events, the gracious hostess supporting her successful husband while making everyone feel welcome and special. Elizabeth is the secret to my success, Michael would tell his colleagues, his arm around my waist. She keeps everything running so smoothly that I can focus entirely on taking care of our clients. I now wondered how many of those colleagues knew about Vanessa. Had they seen Michael with her at restaurants or events? Were there knowing glances exchanged behind my back at company parties? The thought made my cheeks burn with humiliation. Disturbing as these thoughts were, I forced myself to focus on the practical realities facing me. The twins would be leaving for college in less than 4 months. Tuition deposits would be due soon. Our retirement savings, which I'd believed would support us comfortably through our golden years, was nearly gone. And my husband of 18 years, the center of my adult life, was apparently leading a double life with a younger woman. The life I'd thought was established on solid ground had been built on shifting sand. Every memory now required re-examination. Every plan for the future needed recalculation. Every moment of happiness called into question. But amid the devastation, I felt something unexpected stirring within me. A fierce determination I hadn't accessed in years. I had built this life alongside Michael, contributing just as meaningfully as he had, if in different ways. I had put my career aside not out of weakness, but out of love for our family. Those choices had shaped me, but they didn't define my limitations. Somewhere beneath the comfortable routine of being Michael's wife and the twins' mother, Elizabeth Chen, ambitious, intelligent, resilient, still existed, and she was ready to fight back. As I sat surrounded by evidence of Michael's betrayal, memories began to surface, subtle shifts in his behavior, inconsistencies in his stories, moments that had briefly troubled me before being dismissed. In hindsight, these weren't isolated incidents, but pieces of a pattern I'd been too trusting to recognize. The changes began about 14 months ago, shortly after Michael's 48th birthday. He had always been health-conscious, but suddenly he became almost obsessive, joining an exclusive downtown gym, purchasing an entirely new wardrobe, experimenting with expensive skincare products. At the time, I attributed it to a predictable midlife awareness of mortality. I even teased him about it. "Are you trying to recapture your youth?" I'd asked one evening as he examined his jawline in the bathroom mirror. "I just want to stay competitive," he'd replied without making eye contact. The financial industry is full of young hotshots. Clients respond to vitality and confidence. I'd accepted his explanation without question, even feeling a touch of pride that my husband cared about his professional appearance. Now I recognized this period for what it likely was, the beginning of his pursuit of a younger woman, around the same time, Michael's travel schedule intensified. His firm had always required some travel for client meetings and conferences, but suddenly these trips became more frequent and often extended over weekends. There were financial seminars in San Diego, investor meetings in Phoenix, industry conferences in Las Vegas, all happening with remarkable regularity. "It's exhausting," he would complain, returning home with expensive gifts for the girls and me, perhaps driven by guilt. "But the connections I'm making will pay off for our future." I remembered a particular weekend about 10 months ago when he called to say his flight from San Diego had been delayed and he wouldn't be home until late Sunday. I'd been disappointed but understanding. Later that evening, Emma was scrolling through Instagram and casually mentioned, Dad's financial conferences look fun. The hotel has an amazing pool. When I looked over her shoulder, she showed me a post from one of Michael's colleagues tagged, at the same San Diego hotel, showing a group of financial advisors at a poolside happy hour. Michael wasn't in the photo. That's strange, I'd commented. Dad said he's stuck at the airport. Emma had shrugged. Maybe he left early or took a different flight. I had sent Michael a text. How's the airport wait? Dan Peterson posted from your hotel. Looks like you guys had fun by the pool today. His response came quickly. Different conference track. Marketing team stayed for Sunday events. Operations group finished early. Still at airport. Boarding soon. The explanation seemed reasonable, and I'd thought nothing more of it. Now I wondered how many such lies I had accepted without question. His phone habits changed too. Michael had always been casual with his devices, often leaving his phone on the counter or asking me to answer it if his hands were full. Gradually, his phone became an extension of his body, never more than an arm's length away, always face down, password protected with new codes I wasn't privy to. If it rang while he was in the shower, he would rush out dripping wet to answer it privately. Client confidentiality, he would explain when I raised an eyebrow. You know how it is with high net worth individuals. They expect absolute discretion. I did know. Throughout his career, Michael had worked with wealthy clients who valued their privacy. His explanation made perfect sense, and I respected the professional boundaries. Now I realized how effectively he had weaponized my trust against me. 6 months ago, our credit card statement showed a $3,800 charge from Tiffany & Co. right before Valentine's Day. I had been momentarily excited, anticipating a special gift. When February 14th arrived with only flowers and a dinner reservation, I finally mentioned the charge. Oh, that, Michael had said, looking uncomfortable. It was supposed to be a surprise, but the bracelet I ordered for you got lost in shipping somehow. I've been fighting with the insurance company about it. Didn't want to disappoint you, so I didn't mention it. I had been touched by his thoughtfulness and disappointed concern, rather than suspicious of the missing luxury item. Now I knew exactly where that bracelet had ended up, adorning Vanessa Winter's wrist in those beachfront photos. There were financial warning signs, too, which should have been impossible to miss. For someone who managed our daily household budget so carefully, how had I failed to notice our dwindling savings? The answer was embarrassingly simple. I had trusted Michael's expertise. As a financial advisor, he had suggested years ago that we set up automatic contributions to our retirement and college funds with quarterly statements that went directly to his email. Why should both of us do the same review? He had reasoned. I'll handle the long-term investments. You focus on our day-to-day finances. Division of labor, right? It had seemed sensible at the time. Michael was the professional after all. I would occasionally ask how our investments were performing, and he would offer vague reassurances about market fluctuations and long-term growth. I never demanded detailed statements or login credentials to our investment accounts. The quarterly family budget meetings he'd once insisted upon had gradually tapered off to annual conversations, then ceased entirely about 2 years ago. We're on autopilot now, Michael had explained when I suggested resuming them. Everything's set up properly. No need to keep revisiting what's working. And I had believed him because why wouldn't I? We were partners, or so I thought. 3 months ago, there was a moment when I should have, discovered the truth. I was searching for our tax documents in Michael's home office when I found a statement from an unfamiliar bank. It showed a substantial wire transfer to an LLC called Coastal Investments. When I asked Michael about it that evening, his reaction was immediate and defensive. Why were you going through my papers? He demanded, voice rising uncharacteristically. I wasn't going through anything, I'd replied, taken aback by his tone. I was looking for our tax documents. What is Coastal Investments? His expression had softened then, shifting to an apologetic smile. I'm sorry, I snapped. It's a new investment opportunity I'm exploring for us. Beachfront Property Investment Trust. It's still in the preliminary stages, which is why I hadn't mentioned it. Yet, the prospectus looks promising, but I wanted to do more due diligence before involving you in the details. Once again, his explanation had seemed reasonable. He was protecting me from the complex financial world he navigated daily, waiting until he had concrete information before sharing it with me. I now realized Coastal Investments was likely another shell for his San Diego condo with Vanessa. Perhaps the most troubling warning sign came from my own daughters. About 4 months ago, I overheard Olivia and Emma whispering in the kitchen. When they noticed me, they fell suddenly silent with guilty expressions. "What's going on?" I'd asked. They exchanged glances before Emma spoke hesitantly. "We were just wondering, is everything okay between you and Dad?" "Of course," I'd answered automatically. "Why would you ask that?" "He seems different lately," Olivia offered cautiously. "Always on his phone, kind of distant. And he missed my orchestra concert last week, even though he promised he'd be there." "Your father works very hard for this family," I'd defended him immediately. "He's under a lot of pressure at work. The investment market has been volatile." The girls had nodded, seemingly reassured by my confidence. But later that night, I had asked Michael about his increased distraction. "The girls think you're becoming distant," I told him as we prepared for bed. "They miss spending time with you." He had looked genuinely remorseful. "I'll do better, I promise. This quarter has been brutal. The Ferguson account alone is worth millions, and they're considering moving their portfolio. Once things settle down, I'll make it up to everyone." And he had, temporarily, attending Olivia's next concert, taking Emma shopping for a new camera lens she wanted, planning a family weekend in Seattle. The performance of attentive fatherhood and husbandhood had been convincing enough that my concerns faded. Now I wondered if these brief periods of family engagement were calculated maintenance to keep his cover intact. Even our intimate life had offered clues I'd ignored. Physical affection between us had gradually declined over the past year, with Michael often claiming exhaustion from work or initiating brief encounters that felt more like obligation than passion. When I tried to discuss it, he blamed stress and promised things would improve when work pressures eased. I had accepted this explanation with the patient understanding of a long-married spouse, never suspecting he was simply conserving his energy and attention for someone else. The most painful realization was that, on some level, perhaps I had sensed the truth all along. There had been nights I'd lain awake beside him, watching the glow of his phone as he texted someone at midnight, telling myself it was work correspondence. Moments I'd caught his distracted expression when he thought no. One was watching. Times when his explanations seemed just plausible enough to accept, but left a lingering unease I deliberately chose to ignore. Why had I been so willing to dismiss these signs? The answer was both simple and heartbreaking. I had built my entire adult life around our partnership. Acknowledging these red flags would have meant confronting the possibility that the foundation of my existence was crumbling. It had been easier to accept reasonable explanations than to question everything I thought I knew. But now, staring at the evidence of Michael's betrayal spread across our home office desk, I could no longer maintain the comfortable illusion of our perfect life. All the warning signs I had rationalized away now arranged themselves into a clear pattern of deception, one that had been hiding in plain sight while I deliberately looked away. The realization was devastating, but also strangely liberating. I had been blind, yes, but my eyes were now wide open. I spent the entire night poring over every financial document I could find in our home office. As dawn broke over Portland, casting long shadows across our backyard, I sat surrounded by the evidence of Michael's betrayal. Bank statements, credit card bills, property records, and printed emails that painted a devastating picture of systematic financial and emotional deceit. The coffee had gone cold beside me hours ago, but adrenaline kept me alert, Sleep seemed impossible as my mind raced to connect all the pieces of this puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. Beyond the initial shock of discovering the affair and the condominium purchase, I needed to understand exactly what we were facing financially. My daughter's futures depended on it. With methodical precision, I created a spreadsheet documenting every suspicious transaction I could find. The picture that emerged was far worse than I'd initially feared. The $300,000 from our retirement account was just the beginning. Michael had also taken out a $200,000 home equity line of credit against our house 6 months ago, something I'd never signed for, though somehow my signature appeared on the documents. I recognized it immediately as a forgery. He hadn't even tried very hard to make it look authentic. He had also liquidated the girls' college funds, nearly $180,000 we'd been saving since their birth, and transferred the money to the mysterious Coastal Investments LLC, which I was now certain was a shell company created to purchase the San Diego property. All told, he had diverted over $700,000 of our family's money toward his new life with Vanessa. But the most chilling discovery came when I found recent paperwork for a life insurance policy Michael had taken out on me 6 months ago. A $2 million policy with him as the sole beneficiary. My hands trembled as I stared at the document. Was this just typical financial planning, or something more sinister? The timing, coinciding with the beginning of larger transfers to Vanessa, made my blood run cold. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the framed family photos that now seemed like artifacts from a stranger's life, I reached for my phone. It was time to get help. I called my older sister, Janet, who lived across town. Janet had always been my rock, the practical one who saw through pretense. She had never quite warmed to Michael, maintaining a polite but distant relationship with him that I'd always attributed to personality differences. Liz, everything okay? It's not even 7 yet, she answered, her voice thick with sleep. No, I said simply, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Everything is not okay. Can you come over? I need your help, and I don't want to be alone. When Michael returns. To her credit, Janet asked no questions. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Do you need me to bring anything? Just yourself, and maybe a clearer perspective than mine. While waiting for Janet, I decided to dig deeper into who exactly Vanessa Winters was. I searched her name online and found her professional profile. She was a 34-year-old real estate agent specializing in luxury properties in Southern California. Her company website showed a glamorous blonde with a dazzling smile, pictured beside multi-million-dollar oceanfront homes. According to her bio, she had been in real estate for only 5 years, after a successful career in hospitality management. I scrolled through her social media accounts, which were mostly filled with property listings and carefully staged photos of her luxurious lifestyle, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, yacht parties. There was no explicit mention of Michael, but I recognized the balcony of their condo in several photos, always carefully angled to show the ocean view, but not enough identifying details. One post from 3 months ago caught my attention. When a man shows you he's willing to invest in your future, believe him. Blessed are new beginnings. The photo showed a champagne toast on what was clearly the balcony of their shared condo, though only their hands were visible. Janet arrived as promised, letting herself in with her spare key. She found me still at the computer, surrounded by papers. Jesus, Liz, you look like you haven't slept, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. What's going on? Wordlessly, I pushed the printouts toward her, the bank statements, the property records, the photos of Michael and Vanessa. Janet's expression shifted from confusion to shock to cold fury as she absorbed each new piece of information. That absolute bastard, she finally said, her voice low and dangerous. How long have you known? Less than 24 hours, I admitted. I confronted him about the missing retirement funds yesterday and he stormed out. Then I started finding all of this. Janet sat down heavily in the chair opposite me. I always knew there was something off about him, but this is beyond anything I imagined. He threatened divorce when I questioned him, I said, the reality of those words still stunning me. Told me I needed to apologize for checking our accounts. Classic manipulation, Janet noted, her background in psychology showing. Making you feel like you're the one who did something wrong. Have you called a lawyer yet? I shook my head. I wanted to understand the full picture first, and honestly, I've been in shock. Janet nodded, then reached for her phone. I'm calling Diane Silverman. She handled Megan's divorce last year, the one with the cheating cardiologist husband. Megan said Diane was ruthless in the best possible way. As Janet made the call, scheduling an emergency consultation for later that morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Checking out of hotel. We'll be home around noon. Hope you've calmed down and we can discuss this rationally. I showed the message to Janet, who made a disgusted noise. Rationally? He's stolen your retirement, your home equity, and your daughter's college funds to set up a love nest with a woman nearly 15 years younger, and he wants to discuss things rationally? Her outrage somehow steadied me. I need to tell the girls, I said quietly. Before he comes home. They deserve to hear this from me first. Are you sure? Janet asked. They're still at their tournament, right? Maybe wait until— No, I said firmly. Michael will try to control the narrative. He'll paint me as irrational, paranoid. I need to tell them the truth before he can spin his version. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and FaceTimed Emma. Both girls appeared on screen, sweaty, and smiling in their volleyball uniforms. Mom, we won our bracket, Emma exclaimed. We're in the semifinals tomorrow. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I managed, forcing a smile. Listen, I need to talk to both of you about something important. Is there somewhere private you can go? Their expressions sobered immediately. Olivia, always the more perceptive one, asked, Is this about you and Dad? The fight Emma overheard last time he was on the phone late at night? I hadn't known about any overheard argument, but it only confirmed my suspicions that the girls had sensed more than they'd shared. Yes, it's about Dad and me, and some decisions he's made that affect all of us. All of us. The girls moved to what appeared to be an empty stairwell in the sports complex. Once they were seated, I took a deep breath. There's no easy way to say this. Dad has been having a relationship with another woman. He's purchased property with her in San Diego, and he's transferred most of our savings to accounts I didn't know about. Their faces registered shock, Emma's eyes immediately filling with tears, while Olivia's expression hardened in a way that made her look suddenly much older than 17. Are you getting divorced? Emma asked, her voice small. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I wanted you both to hear this from me first, because Dad is coming home today, and things might be difficult. How much did he take? Olivia asked, practical even in crisis. What about our college money? I hesitated, not wanting to burden them with the full financial reality, but they deserved the truth. It's significant, including your college funds. But I promise you I'm going to fix this. You will still go to college. I'll figure it out. I hate him, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. How could he do this to us? Olivia put her arm around her twin. We're coming home. We'll talk to Coach. No, I interrupted firmly. You stay and finish your tournament. Janet is here with me and I'm meeting with a lawyer today. This is your moment, your achievement. Don't let his choices take that away from you. After several more minutes of reassurance and a promise to call them after my meeting with the attorney, I ended the call. My heart ached for my daughters, whose secure world had just been shattered as thoroughly as mine had. Janet squeezed my shoulder. You did the right thing. They needed to hear it from you. I nodded, grateful for her presence. I need to keep gathering information before he gets home. I have a feeling once he realizes I know everything, he's going to make accessing these accounts and documents much more difficult. We spent the next hour printing, photographing, and saving everything I could find related to our finances and Michael's betrayal. Janet methodically organized the documents into folders while I continued searching. A notification popped up on Michael's still logged-in email. A new message from Vanessa. Are you sure she's going to accept the divorce? What if she fights? It? Everything we've planned depends on a clean break. I clicked on the email, revealing their full exchange. Michael had written to her last night after our confrontation. Elizabeth questioned me about the retirement account today. I shut it down and suggested divorce. She seemed shocked, so I think she'll be easy to manipulate into a quick settlement. She's never been confrontational. Once the divorce is final, we'll have everything transferred before she realizes what happened. The life insurance is just backup in case things get complicated. The cold, calculated tone of his message made me physically ill. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a midlife crisis. This was premeditated financial and emotional abuse, a systematic plan to discard me once I'd served my purpose in his life story. The message continued. The Portland house should sell for around $1.2 million in this market. Once we pay off the mortgage and the HELOC, we'll still clear about $500K. Combined with what I've already moved to our accounts, we'll have more than enough to start our new life in San Diego. Elizabeth has been out of the workforce for so long, she'll have no choice but to accept whatever settlement I offer. The final lines of the email cemented my resolve. Don't worry about the girls. They're almost adults now. I'll maintain the bare minimum relationship to avoid looking like the bad guy, but they're not my priority anymore. You are. Our future is. I stared at the screen, my hands eerily steady despite the rage building inside me. This was the moment of absolute truth. My husband hadn't just betrayed me. He had calculated and executed a plan to discard me, steal our family's financial security, and abandon his responsibilities to our daughters. The Elizabeth of yesterday might have collapsed under the weight of this revelation, but as I sat in the morning light, surrounded by the evidence of Michael's betrayal, I felt a strange clarity descending. The fog of confusion and hurt was burning away, replaced by a laser-focused determination I hadn't felt in decades. Janet, I said, my voice firm, call Diane back. Tell her we need to meet as soon as possible. And then I need you to help me move some money before Michael can touch it. The woman who had been content to trust her husband with all financial decisions was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who would fight with every resource at her disposal to protect herself and her daughters from the man who had so callously betrayed them all. After Janet left to pick up lunch before our appointment with the attorney, I found myself alone in the suddenly too large house. The practical tasks of gathering evidence and making appointments had kept the full emotional weight of Michael's betrayal at bay. But in the quiet aftermath, with nothing left to immediately investigate or document, the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wandered from room to room, seeing our shared history in every corner. The dining room where we'd celebrated countless family milestones, the living room where we'd opened Christmas gifts each year, the kitchen island, where we'd helped the girls with science projects and baked birthday cakes. These spaces that had once represented security and belonging now felt like elaborate stage sets for a production I hadn't realized I was starring in. In our bedroom, I stood before the full-length mirror, studying my reflection as if I might find some visible mark of this betrayal on my body. I was still the same Elizabeth Chen on the outside, shoulder-length black hair with strands of gray I'd recently stopped coloring, laugh lines around my eyes that Michael once called charming, the slight softness around my middle that came with middle age and motherhood. But inside, I felt fundamentally altered, as if the structure of my DNA had been rewritten overnight. Who was I, if not Michael Chen's wife? For 18 years, my identity had been inextricably linked with his. Mrs. Chen, Michael's wife, the guy. twins' mother, the gracious hostess at company parties, the reliable volunteer coordinator at school functions. I had embraced these roles so completely that I'd allowed my individual identity to fade into the background, becoming the supporting character in what I'd thought was our shared story. The realization brought me to my knees beside the bed we'd shared for nearly 2 decades. I buried my face in my hands as the first real sobs tore through me, violent, guttural sounds that seemed to come from some primal place I hadn't known existed within me. I cried for the young woman who had given up her promising career without hesitation, believing it was a shared sacrifice for our family. I cried for the middle-aged woman who had trusted so completely that she'd failed to see the dismantling of her financial security happening right before her eyes. I cried for my daughters, whose foundation had been shattered by their fathers' selfishness. But mostly, I cried for the utter humiliation of it all. While I had been proud of our solid marriage and family life, Michael had been systematically planning his escape with a younger woman, using our family resources to fund his new beginning. The depth of deception required to maintain this double life while looking me in the eye each day was staggering. Had anything been real? Had he ever truly loved me? Or had I simply been a convenient stepping stone in his life plan? The supportive wife who would raise his children and maintain his home while he built his career, only to be discarded when a more appealing option presented itself? The physical symptoms of emotional trauma manifested with surprising intensity. My chest felt constricted, each breath a conscious effort. My stomach churned with nausea that sent me rushing to the bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left but bitter bile. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, as if my nervous system couldn't process the magnitude of this betrayal. Sitting on the cool tile of the bathroom floor, I found myself mentally cataloging moments I had believed were genuine. Michael, holding my hand in the delivery room as our daughters were born, his tearful pride at their high school achievements, the way he'd held me after my father's funeral 3 years ago. Had these all been performances? The uncertainty was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. I couldn't even trust my own memories anymore. I forced myself to shower, the hot water mixing with fresh tears as I tried to wash away the feeling of contamination that clung to me. As I dried off and dressed in clean clothes, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the bedroom wall, younger versions of ourselves beaming with hope and promise. In a sudden burst of rage, I ripped it from the wall and hurled it across the room, feeling a savage satisfaction as the glass shattered against the hardwood floor. The sound of breaking glass triggered something in me, a release of the rage I'd been trying to contain beneath more acceptable emotions, like grief and confusion. I began moving through the house, removing every photo of Michael from the walls and shelves, placing them in a cardboard box with controlled fury. I couldn't bear to see his face smiling back at me from our family portraits, the evidence of his duplicity now so obvious in his eyes that I couldn't understand how I'd missed it. As I reached for a family photo from our Hawaii trip, I noticed my hands were bleeding. I'd cut myself on the broken glass without even feeling it. The physical pain was almost a relief, something tangible to focus on amid the emotional maelstrom. I wrapped a kitchen towel around my palm and continued my systematic removal of Michael's visual presence from our home. When Janet returned with sandwiches I couldn't imagine eating, she found me sitting on the living room floor surrounded by empty picture frames and a box of Michael's extracted photos. "Oh, Liz," she said softly, setting down the food and sitting beside me. She gently took my hand, unwrapping the now blood-soaked towel to examine the cut. "Let's clean this up." As she led me to the kitchen and methodically cleaned and bandaged my hand, I finally spoke the words that had been circling in my mind all morning. "I don't know who I am anymore, Janet." My sister's hands paused briefly before continuing their careful ministrations. "You're Elizabeth Chen. You're my brilliant, resilient sister who graduated top of her class at Oregon State. You're the woman who single-handedly organized the fundraiser that saved the arts program at the girls' school. You're the most patient, Loving mother I've ever known. You're all of those things with or without Michael. But I gave everything up for him, I whispered, the admission painful in its rawness. My career, my independence, my identity. What do I have to show for it now? Janet secured the bandage and then took both my hands in hers, looking directly into my eyes. You have two amazing daughters who are about to learn what real strength looks like by watching their mother rise from this. You have skills and intelligence that didn't disappear just because you chose to focus them on your family for a while. And you have people who love you for who you truly are, not for what you can do for them. Her words reached through the fog of my despair, offering the first glimpse of a path forward. Still, the practical realities loomed like insurmountable obstacles. I haven't worked in a real job in 17 years, Janet. What company wants to hire a 46-year-old woman with a nearly 2-decade gap in her resume? How will I support myself, let alone help the girls through college? He's taken everything. Not everything, Janet countered firmly. He couldn't take your intelligence, your work ethic, or your determination, though he certainly tried to convince you those things didn't matter. And he definitely underestimated all three. As we sat in the kitchen, picking at sandwiches neither of us had the appetite for, the reality of my situation settled into my bones. The future I had planned, the comfortable retirement with Michael, the role of supportive grandmother I had anticipated, the security of our carefully built nest egg, had vanished overnight. In its place loomed a vast uncertainty that would have paralyzed me with fear just 24 hours earlier. I keep thinking about Vanessa, I admitted, surprised by my own words. I wonder if she knows what he's capable of, or if she believes she's different, that he wouldn't do to her what he's done to me. Janet shook her head. She's complicit in this, Liz. Those emails make it clear she knows exactly what he's doing to you and the girls. Don't waste your energy feeling sorry for her. I don't feel sorry for her, I clarified, realizing the truth as I spoke it. I feel sorry for the version of myself that believed in Michael so completely. I gave him control over not just our finances, but my sense of self-worth. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring my value through his eyes. The insight struck me with unexpected force. Perhaps that had been Michael's most insidious manipulation, convincing me that my worth was tied to my usefulness to him and our family, that my sacrifice was noble rather than a slow erosion of my independence. As the time for our appointment with the attorney approached, I found myself standing again before the mirror in our bedroom. This time I looked beyond the surface features, beyond the reddened eyes and pale complexion of a woman in emotional crisis. I searched for the core of who I had been before Michael, the ambitious marketing student with big dreams, the young professional who had earned promotions through her own merit, the woman who had once believed in her own potential. She was still there, buried beneath years of compromise and accommodation, waiting to emerge again. The thought sent an unexpected current of energy through me, cutting through the fog of grief and humiliation. He expects me to fall apart, I said to Janet as we gathered my documentation for the attorney meeting. That's his plan, that I'll be too devastated to fight back effectively. Janet nodded. Men like Michael count on the emotional paralysis of betrayal. They use the shock to push through their agenda before their victims can gather their resources. Then I can't give him what he expects, I said, straightening my shoulders. I can't let the girls see me collapse under this. They need to know that we can survive this, that his betrayal doesn't define our family's worth. The drive to Diane Silverman's downtown office was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The emotional pendulum within me swung violently between crushing grief and burning anger, between paralyzing fear and steely resolve. I knew all these feelings would continue to cycle through me in the days and weeks ahead. There was no shortcut through the trauma of betrayal on this scale. But as we pulled into the parking garage of the sleek office building, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. I would allow myself to feel each emotion fully, to acknowledge the pain and fear without letting them dictate my actions. I would permit myself private moments of breakdown like this morning, but publicly. I would move forward with clear-eyed determination. Michael had underestimated me for years, dismissing my contributions and capabilities. That underestimation would be his downfall. As Janet and I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in its mirrored wall. Behind the evidence of tears and sleeplessness, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. The flash of determination in my eyes that had once characterized the young woman with dreams of her own. "Are you ready for this?" Janet asked as the elevator climbed toward the law offices. I took a deep breath, straightening my posture and squaring my shoulders. "No," I answered honestly. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Diane Silverman's office exuded confidence and power, from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland to the sleek modern furniture that somehow managed to be both intimidating and comfortable. The attorney herself matched her surroundings, a polished woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an air of contained intensity that immediately put me at ease. This was a woman who knew how to fight. "Mrs. Chen," she said, extending her hand after Janet had made the introductions. "I understand you're facing an emergency situation." "Please call me Elizabeth," I replied, shaking her hand. "And yes, I discovered yesterday that my husband has been systematically draining our accounts to fund a relationship with another woman. He's threatened divorce, and I believe he's planning to leave me financially devastated." If Diane was shocked by my direct approach, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and gestured for us to sit at the conference table where a legal pad and pen were waiting. "Tell me everything, starting with when you first noticed something was wrong," she instructed. "Don't leave out any financial details, no matter how small they might seem." For the next hour, I methodically laid out the situation: the missing retirement funds, the home equity line of credit with my forged signature, the emptied college accounts, the San Diego condo purchased with Vanessa Winters, and most disturbing, the recently acquired life insurance policy on me. Janet occasionally added details or clarifications, but mostly sat supportively as I presented the evidence we'd gathered. Diane took meticulous notes, occasionally asking pointed questions about account numbers, dates, and dollar amounts. When I reached the part about Michael's emails to Vanessa revealing their plan for a clean break divorce that would leave me with minimal assets, the attorney's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Do you have copies of these emails?" she asked. I nodded and passed her the folder containing printouts of the damning correspondence. She read them carefully, her eyes narrowing as she reached the part where Michael dismissed his responsibilities to our daughters. "Mr. Chen has made several critical mistakes," she said finally, looking up at me. "First, he's committed financial fraud by forging your signature on the HELOC and potentially other documents. Second, he's created a clear paper trail showing his intent to hide marital assets, which judges take very seriously. Third, he's been foolish enough to document his plans in writing. She was still there, buried beneath years of compromise and accommodation, waiting to emerge again. The thought sent an unexpected current of energy through me, cutting through the fog of grief and humiliation. "He expects me to fall apart," I said to Janet as we gathered my documentation for the attorney meeting. "That's his plan, that I'll be too devastated to fight back effectively." Janet nodded. "Men like Michael count on the emotional paralysis of betrayal. They use the shock to push through their agenda before their victims can gather their resources." "Then I can't give him what he expects," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I can't let the girls see me collapse under this. They need to know that we can survive this, that his betrayal doesn't define our family's worth." The drive to Diane Silverman's downtown office was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The emotional pendulum within me swung violently between crushing grief, and burning anger between paralyzing fear and steely resolve. I knew all these feelings would continue to cycle through me in the days and weeks ahead. There was no shortcut through the trauma of betrayal on this scale. But as we pulled into the parking garage of the sleek office building, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. I would allow myself to feel each emotion fully, to acknowledge the pain and fear without letting them dictate my actions. I would permit myself private moments of breakdown like this morning, but publicly. I would move forward with clear-eyed determination. Michael had underestimated me for years, dismissing my contributions and capabilities. That underestimation would be his downfall. As Janet and I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in its mirrored wall. Behind the evidence of tears and sleeplessness, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. The flash of determination in my eyes that had once characterized the young woman with dreams of her own. "Are you ready for this?" Janet asked as the elevator climbed toward the law offices. I took a deep breath, straightening my posture and squaring my shoulders. "No," I answered honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway." Diane Silverman's office exuded confidence and power, from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland to the sleek modern furniture that somehow managed to be both intimidating and comfortable. The attorney herself matched her surroundings, a polished woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an air of contained intensity that immediately put me at ease. This was a woman who knew how to fight. "Mrs. Chen," she said, extending her hand after Janet had made the introductions. "I understand you're facing an emergency situation." "Please, call me Elizabeth," I replied, shaking her hand. "And yes, I discovered yesterday that my husband has been systematically draining our accounts to fund a relationship with another woman. He's threatened divorce, and I believe he's planning to leave me financially devastated." If Diane was shocked by my direct approach, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and gestured for us to sit at the conference table where a legal pad and pen were waiting. "Tell me everything, starting with when you first noticed something was wrong," she instructed. "Don't leave out any financial details, no matter how small they might seem." For the next hour, I methodically laid out the situation: the missing retirement funds, the home equity line of credit with my forged signature, the emptied college accounts, the San Diego condo purchased with Vanessa Winters, and, most disturbing, the recently acquired life insurance policy on me. Janet occasionally added details or clarifications, but mostly sat supportively as I presented the evidence we'd gathered. Diane took meticulous notes, occasionally asking pointed questions about account numbers, dates, and dollar amounts. When I reached the part about Michael's emails to Vanessa revealing their plan for a clean break divorce that would leave me with minimal assets, the attorney's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Do you have copies of these emails?" she asked. I nodded and passed her the folder containing printouts of the damning correspondence. She read them carefully, her eyes narrowing as she reached the part where Michael dismissed his responsibilities to our daughters. "Mr. Chen has made several critical mistakes," she said finally, looking up at me. "First, he's committed financial fraud by forging your signature on the HELOC and potentially other documents. Second, he's created a clear paper trail showing his intent to hide marital assets, which judges take very seriously. Third, he's been foolish enough to document his plans in writing." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Elizabeth, let me be clear about something. What your husband has done isn't just morally reprehensible. Much of it is actually illegal. This isn't just a divorce case. It's potentially a criminal matter involving fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of marital assets." The implications of her words settled over me like a weight. I had come seeking a fair divorce settlement. I hadn't fully processed that Michael's actions might have crossed into criminal territory. "What do you recommend?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to move quickly before he can hide more assets or pressure you into a hasty settlement," Diane replied. First, we'll file for divorce immediately with emergency motions to freeze all remaining assets and accounts. Second, we'll document the forgery and file police reports if necessary. Third, we'll engage a forensic accountant to trace every penny he's moved. She paused, studying my face. But before we do any of that, I need to ask you a fundamental question, Elizabeth. What do you want out of this? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? 24 hours ago, I would have said I wanted my marriage back, my secure future restored, the comfortable life I'd believed in. But that life had been an illusion, built on Michael's deception and my willingness to trust without verification. I want what's fair, I said finally. I want financial security for myself and educational funds restored for my daughters. I hesitated, then continued with growing conviction. I want Michael to face consequences for what he's done. I don't want revenge, but I won't let him walk away unscathed while my daughters and I struggle to rebuild. Diane nodded approvingly. That's a healthy perspective. Some clients in your position are so devastated they can't think strategically, or they're so angry they can only focus on punishment. Neither approach leads to the best outcome. She began outlining a comprehensive strategy, detailing each legal step we would take and explaining the likely responses from Michael and his attorney. As she spoke, I found myself fully engaged, asking questions and considering options with a clarity that surprised me. There's one more thing, I said when she finished. Michael is planning to come home at noon today. He doesn't know what I've discovered beyond the initial missing retirement funds. How should I handle that confrontation? Diane checked her watch. It's almost 11 now. I don't want you alone with him, especially given what we've discovered. Men, like your husband, can become unpredictable when their plans are threatened. I'll be there, Janet interjected firmly. Good, Diane approved. But here's what I recommend. Don't reveal everything you know. Let him believe you're still processing the retirement account issue. Don't mention the emails, the condo, or Vanessa. The element of surprise is one of our few advantages right now. She handed me her card with her cell phone number highlighted. If things escalate or you feel unsafe at any point, call me immediately. Then the police. We can file a restraining order if necessary. As we prepared to leave, Diane held my gaze for a moment. Elizabeth, I've handled hundreds of divorce cases involving financial misconduct and infidelity. What sets the successful clients apart isn't their initial circumstances, but their ability to move from emotional reactions to strategic thinking. Based on how you've presented your situation today, I believe you have that ability. Her words settled into me, affirming something I was just beginning to recognize in myself. Despite the emotional devastation of the past 24 hours, I had already begun to think strategically, to gather evidence, to protect what remained of my financial resources. In the elevator descending to the parking garage, Janet squeezed my hand. You were impressive in there, Liz. I don't think I could have been that composed if I were in your shoes. I don't feel composed, I admitted. I feel like I'm operating on some kind of autopilot while part of me is still screaming in disbelief. That's your survival instinct, she replied, and thank God for it. As we drove home to prepare for Michael's return, I found myself at a crossroads unlike any I'd faced before. The path behind me, the comfortable, predictable life as Michael's wife, had vanished. Ahead lay complete uncertainty, the daunting prospect of rebuilding my life from the ground up at 46 years old. The practical questions alone were overwhelming. Where would I live after the divorce? How would I support myself? What skills did I still have that were marketable after almost 2 decades away from the professional world? How would I help my daughters through college without the savings Michael had stolen? But beneath these practical concerns, a more fundamental question loomed. Who would I choose to become in the aftermath of this betrayal? I could become bitter, defined by victimhood, allowing this trauma to determine the course of my remaining years. I could surrender to the fear and insecurity Michael had cultivated in me, accepting whatever scraps he deigned to offer in the divorce settlement. I could retreat into grief and anger, walling myself off from future trust or connection. Or I could choose transformation, using this crisis as the catalyst for reclaiming the ambitious, confident woman I had once been before, gradually subordinating my identity to Michael's. I could fight not just for financial justice, but for a new vision of my life, one built on self-reliance and rediscovered purpose. As our car pulled into the driveway of what had been our family home, I made my decision. This betrayal would not define me. Instead, it would become the foundation upon which I would build a new life, not despite the pain, but because of it. The lessons learned through this experience, however brutal, would become wisdom rather than wounds. "He's already here," Janet observed, nodding toward Michael's silver BMW parked in front of the garage. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the confrontation ahead. "Remember what Diane said. Don't reveal everything we know." Janet nodded. "I'll follow your lead." We found Michael in the kitchen, casually making himself a sandwich as if nothing had happened. He looked up when we entered, his expression shifting to one of careful neutrality when he saw Janet. "Janet," he said with a nod. "I didn't realize you were visiting." "I called her," I said simply. "I needed support after you walked out yesterday." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the situation. "Liz, I think we should talk privately. Family matters should stay within the family." "Janet is family," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid pounding of my heart. "And I want her here." He sighed dramatically, playing the role of the reasonable husband dealing with an irrational wife. "Fine. Look, I think we both said things yesterday that we regret. I shouldn't have suggested divorce so hastily. It was a reaction to feeling distrusted." I marveled at his performance, the apparent sincerity in his eyes as he lied directly to my face. Had he always been this skilled at deception, or had I simply been too trusting to notice? "Why is our retirement account empty, Michael?" I asked, keeping my question focused on the one issue he knew I was aware of. He set down his sandwich, assuming an expression of patient explanation. "It's not empty. It's been reallocated. I've been moving our investments into more aggressive growth opportunities. The market is changing, and I wanted to position us better for retirement." "Without discussing it with me?" I challenged. "I tried to explain investment strategies to you before, Liz, but you've never shown much interest," he said, his tone subtly condescending. "I made decisions based on my professional expertise. That's always been our arrangement." I could almost admire the masterful way he was attempting to gaslight me, to make me question my right to be concerned about our financial future. The old Elizabeth might have backed down, might have accepted his explanation out of a desire to keep the peace. But I was no longer that woman. "I'd like to see documentation of these investments," I said calmly. "Account statements, prospectuses, anything showing where our retirement funds have gone." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he controlled it. "I can gather that information, but it will take some time. These are complex investment vehicles." "I'm sure they are," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "In the meantime, I'd like access to all our financial accounts. The passwords seem to have been changed." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Is this really necessary, Elizabeth? This hostility and suspicion? If you can't trust me after 18 years of marriage, perhaps my suggestion about divorce wasn't so hasty after all." And there it was, the threat again, intended to make me retreat in fear. But this time, I recognized the manipulation for what it was. "Maybe it wasn't," I agreed, watching surprise register on his face. "Maybe we do need to reconsider our future together. Trust works both ways, Michael. A marriage can't survive when one partner makes unilateral decisions that affect both people's financial security." For a moment, he seemed unsure how to respond to this unexpected direction. He had clearly anticipated either my tearful apology or perhaps an angry outburst he could dismiss as emotional irrationality. My calm assertion caught him off balance. "Let's not be hasty," he backpedaled. "We can work through this. I'll show you the investment details, restore your access to the accounts. This doesn't have to escalate." I nodded noncommittally, maintaining the facade that I knew only about the retirement account. That would be a start. As Michael launched into a detailed explanation of fictional investment opportunities, I observed him with new eyes. I saw the calculated charm, the practiced sincerity, the subtle condescension he'd always used to maintain control of our relationship. I recognized the tactics that had kept me comfortably in the dark for years, accepting his expertise without question. In that moment, watching him lie so effortlessly, I made my final transformation decision. I would not only fight for my financial security through legal channels, I would reclaim my independence in every sense. I would rebuild my career, rediscover my strengths, and create a life that belonged fully to me, one that no one could ever take away again. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles and emotional challenges. But for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The marriage I had believed in was gone, but so were the invisible constraints I had accepted for nearly 2 decades. Whatever happened next would be on my terms. After Michael left, surprisingly cordial but clearly unsettled by my composure, Janet and I sat at the kitchen table, mapping out our next steps. In just 48 hours, my life had been completely upended, but with the initial shock wearing off, I could now focus on gathering the resources I would need for the battle ahead. "Diane said her office would file the emergency motions tomorrow morning," I said, reviewing my notes from our meeting. "That should freeze what's left of our accounts, but we need to secure whatever we can access now." Janet nodded. "What do you have in your personal accounts?" The question made me uncomfortable. "I don't actually have personal accounts," I admitted. "We have a joint checking account for household expenses that I manage, but everything else is either in joint accounts or accounts with just Michael's name that I don't have access to anymore." Janet's expression reflected what I was already feeling: dismay at how completely I had allowed my financial identity to be subsumed into Michael's. It was a stark reminder of how vulnerable I had made myself. "First priority, then," she said practically. "We need to get you set up with your own accounts at a different bank before Michael can drain what's left of your accessible funds." Within an hour, we had visited a local credit union where Janet was a member. With her introduction, I was able to open checking and savings accounts in my name only. I transferred half of the remaining balance from our joint household account, about $12,000, into my new account. It wasn't much compared to what Michael had taken, but it was something that was now solely mine, protected from his reach. "He'll notice the transfer," I said as we left the credit union. "Good," Janet replied. "It's legal for you to take half of joint funds. Let him see that you're not going to sit passively while he controls everything." Our next stop was my safe deposit box at our regular bank. Years ago, I had started keeping important documents there: birth certificates, passports, our marriage license, property deeds. I was relieved to find Michael hadn't accessed it. The contents were untouched. I removed everything, knowing I couldn't risk leaving these critical documents where Michael might get to them. As we drove back to the house, I made a mental inventory of other resources I would need to gather. My professional network had atrophied during my years focused on family, but I still maintained friendships with a few former colleagues from my marketing days. There was Carol Jang, now a marketing director at a major sportswear company, who had occasionally tried to persuade me to do contract work, and James Wilson, my former boss, who had started his own agency 5 years ago and had twice offered me project-based roles I had declined. "I need to rebuild my professional connections," I told Janet. "Even with the best divorce settlement, I'll need to support myself long-term." "That's smart thinking," she agreed. "But don't overwhelm yourself trying to solve everything at once. Focus on immediate needs first, then build toward the future." When we returned home, I found an email from Diane with a detailed list of information and documents her office needed for the divorce filing. The comprehensive nature of the list was daunting: financial records going back 5 years, property assessments, insurance policies, tax returns, retirement and investment account statements, many of which I had never seen or didn't know how to access. I forwarded the email to Janet, feeling a wave of anxiety. How am I supposed to get all this when Michael has kept me in the dark about most of our finances? That's exactly why Diane needs to know what's missing, Janet explained. The gaps in your knowledge are evidence of financial control and isolation. Document what you can access and what you can't. Both tell an important story. For the next several hours, we systematically went through the house, gathering every financial record we could find. Michael had always maintained a home office. That was primarily his domain, but he hadn't expected me to conduct this kind of search. In the back of his filing cabinet, I found a folder labeled Property Investments that contained preliminary paperwork for the San Diego condo, confirming what I had seen in his emails. I also discovered statements for several investment accounts I hadn't known existed, including one with a balance of over $200,000 that appeared to be funded by bonuses Michael had never disclosed to me. With shaking hands, I photographed and cataloged each document, creating digital backups that I stored both on my new personal laptop Janet had insisted we purchase and in a secure cloud account only I could access. "This is gold," Janet said, reviewing what we'd found. "Diane will be able to use these to demonstrate his pattern of financial deception." By early evening, I was mentally and physically exhausted, but there was still more to do. The twins would be returning from their volleyball tournament the following day, and I needed to prepare for the difficult conversations ahead. They deserved complete honesty, but I also wanted to reassure them that their futures weren't in jeopardy, despite their father's actions. I need to contact their school, I realized suddenly. Michael is listed as the primary contact for financial matters. I need to make sure he can't withdraw them or access their records without my knowledge. Janet helped me draft emails to the school administration explaining that we were in the process of separation and requesting that no changes be made to the girls' enrollment status without my written consent. I also contacted their volleyball coach, briefly explaining the situation and asking to be notified of any communication from Michael about their activities or travel. "What about your friends?" Janet asked as we took a break for dinner, takeout she had ordered since neither of us had the energy to cook. "Who else can be part of your support network through this?" The question gave me pause. I had friends, certainly other mothers from the girls' school, neighbors, women from my book club, but I realized with some discomfort that most of these relationships existed within the context of my identity as Michael's wife. How many of these friendships would survive the seismic shift in my circumstances? How many of these women had I truly let know me as an individual rather than as one half of Michael and Elizabeth? "I need to think carefully about who to tell and when," I said slowly. "Some people will take sides. Others will feel uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. And honestly, I'm not ready for the pity or the gossip." But there were a few friends I knew I could count on absolutely. Megan Davis had been my closest friend since the twins started kindergarten. She had gone through her own divorce 5 years earlier and had rebuilt her life with remarkable resilience, returning to her career as a physical therapist and eventually finding happiness with a new partner. Her insight would be invaluable. And there was David Larson, my next-door neighbor and a retired attorney, who had always treated me with respect that felt distinctly separate from my status as Michael's wife. He had offered me thoughtful career advice when I'd mentioned considering freelance work, and I suspected he would be a discreet and helpful ally in navigating the legal complexities ahead. I made a list of these key individuals, planning how and when to approach each of them. As I worked, I realized I was thinking more strategically than I had in years, assessing resources and planning contingencies with a clarity that surprised me. Perhaps these skills had always been there, dormant, but not destroyed by years of deferring to Michael's decision-making. "I need to contact my parents," I said, the thought suddenly overwhelming. My father had passed away 3 years ago, but my mother still lived in our hometown of Eugene. At 75, she was active and sharp, but also somewhat traditional in her views on marriage. How would I explain to her that her son-in-law of 18 years had been systematically betraying her daughter? "Do you want me there when you call her?" Janet offered. I shook my head. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to do myself." The conversation with my mother was difficult but ultimately reassuring. After her initial shock and concern, her protective instincts emerged strongly. "You come stay with me if you need to, Elizabeth," she insisted. "That house belongs to both of you, but if you need space from him, my door is always open." Her unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. "Thanks, Mom. I might take you up on that, but right now I need to stay here for the girls and to maintain my legal position regarding the house." "Well, I'm coming up to Portland this weekend then," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. "You shouldn't be alone through this, and Janet can't be there all the time." After we hung up, I felt a warmth spreading through me despite the circumstances. In just one day, I had already begun assembling a support network that extended beyond just Janet: legal counsel, financial resources, family support, and a plan to reconnect with professional contacts and key friends. "We should make a list of your skills and qualifications," Janet suggested as we continued organizing documents well into the evening. "Not just from your marketing career, but everything you've done since then, too." I looked at her skeptically. "Like what? Carpooling and making Halloween costumes?" "Don't do that," Janet said sharply. "Don't minimize your capabilities the way Michael has conditioned you to do. You've been the treasurer for the PTA, managed complex fundraising campaigns for the school, created that entire marketing plan for your friend Carol's nonprofit, maintained detailed financial records for your household, and coordinated schedules for 4 people for years. Those are legitimate skills that translate to the workplace." She was right, I realized. Over the years, I had internalized Michael's subtle messaging that my contributions were somehow less valuable than his because they didn't come with a paycheck. I had allowed him to define my worth based on his criteria, forgetting that I had chosen to invest my talents in our family rather than lost those talents altogether. As night fell, Janet helped me secure the house, double-checking locks and setting the alarm system. I hadn't told her about the life insurance policy Michael had taken out on me, not wanting to seem paranoid, but the discovery had left me uneasy about my physical safety. Though Michael had never been violent, I now realized there was much about him I didn't know. "You should stay in the guest room tonight," I told Janet. "It's too late for you to drive home." She agreed readily, and I suspected she had already planned to stay regardless of my invitation. Having her presence in the house was reassuring as I tried to process everything that had happened and all that was still to come. In bed that night, surrounded by pillows that still faintly carried Michael's scent, I reviewed the resources I had gathered in just one day: financial documentation, legal representation, secure personal accounts, physical possession of important documents, and the beginnings of a support network that would help me navigate the challenges ahead. It wasn't enough yet, not nearly enough for the battle I was facing, but it was a start. Each step, no matter how small, took me further from the vulnerable position Michael had carefully constructed for me and closer to rebuilding my independence. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: the twins' return, continued legal proceedings, and the inevitable confrontations with Michael as he realized I wasn't going to quietly accept whatever terms he dictated. But for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a glimmer of confidence in my ability to face these challenges. I had survived the initial shock. I had made the decision to fight rather than capitulate. And now I was gathering the resources I would need for the long journey ahead. Michael had spent years subtly convincing me that I couldn't survive without him. I was about to prove just how wrong he had been. 3 days after discovering Michael's betrayal, I sat at our dining room table surrounded by a team of professionals I had assembled with remarkable efficiency. Diane Silverman, my divorce attorney; Robert Kelsey, the forensic accountant she had recommended; Janet; and surprisingly, David Larson, my retired attorney neighbor who had offered his insights on property law when I confided in him about my situation. We were reviewing the substantial evidence we had gathered and the legal strategy Diane had developed when the front door opened. Michael walked in, stopping abruptly at the sight of the impromptu war council in his dining room. "What is this?" he demanded, his confident facade slipping for a moment before he regained his composure. "Elizabeth, we agreed to discuss our financial concerns privately." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Michael, you suggested that. I never agreed. His eyes darted from face to face, lingering on Diane's professional attire and the stack of legal documents on the table. Recognition flickered in his expression. "You're an attorney," he said to Diane. "This is completely unnecessary, Elizabeth. Whatever issues we're having can be resolved between us without involving lawyers." "Mr. Chen," Diane responded calmly, "I'm Diane Silverman, representing your wife in divorce proceedings that were filed this morning. I have here an emergency order signed by Judge Reynolds freezing all marital assets pending full financial disclosure." She slid a document across the table toward him. Michael didn't touch it, his face paling slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Divorce?" he repeated, turning to me with an expression of wounded innocence that once would have made me question myself. "Liz, this is an extreme overreaction to a simple disagreement about investments." "It's not about disagreements, Michael," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's about fraud, forgery, and betrayal. It's about the condo in San Diego that you purchased with Vanessa Winters using our retirement funds and the girls' college savings." His face went completely still, the practiced mask of confusion giving way to cold calculation as he realized the extent of what I had discovered. "You've been going through my private communications," he said, attempting to shift blame. "That's an invasion of privacy." Robert Kelsey, the forensic accountant, chose this moment to speak up. "Mr. Chen, we've documented transfers totaling over $700,000 from joint marital accounts to entities controlled by you and Ms. Winters. We've also identified the forged documents used to secure the home equity line of credit against this property, as well as the liquidation of your daughter's college funds." Michael's eyes narrowed as he seemed to reassess the situation, recognizing that he was facing not just an emotional wife, but a coordinated legal team with substantial evidence. "I see you've been busy," he said coldly. "Whatever you think you've found has been misinterpreted. As I tried to explain before, I've been reorganizing our investments for better returns." "Save it for your attorney, Michael," I interrupted. "The court order requires you to provide full financial disclosure within 5 days and prohibits any further transfers or withdrawals from our accounts. It also grants me exclusive use of this house during the proceedings." "This is still my house," he snapped, his mask of reasonableness falling away completely. "Actually," David interjected, "as marital property in a contested divorce with allegations of financial impropriety, the court has full authority to determine temporary possession. I'd advise you to read the order carefully before making any decisions you might regret." Michael finally picked up the document, scanning it quickly, his expression darkening. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling Gerald," he said, referring to his friend who was a corporate attorney. "That would be wise," Diane agreed. "You should have legal representation. In the meantime, the order requires you to remove only personal items from the home within the next 24 hours. Anything of significant value must remain until the court determines appropriate division of assets." Michael looked at me, real anger flashing in his eyes for the first time. "You won't get away with this, Elizabeth. You're nothing without me. Who do you think will hire a middle-aged housewife with outdated skills and a nearly 20-year employment gap?" The words were meant to wound, to remind me of my vulnerability and dependence. Just days ago, they would have hit their mark, reinforcing the insecurities he had carefully cultivated over years. But now they simply confirmed what I already knew. Michael had never seen me as an equal partner, but as a dependent whose worth was measured by his standards alone. I guess we'll find out, I replied calmly. But I'd rather struggle on my own terms than continue living a comfortable lie. His phone rang and he checked it, his expression shifting subtly. Concern, perhaps. Even fear. He excused himself to take the call in the kitchen, but not before I glimpsed Vanessa's name on the screen. While he was gone, Diane leaned toward me. "You're doing extremely well, Elizabeth. Keep your composure no matter what he says." When Michael returned, his demeanor had changed. The confrontational edge had been replaced by a more calculating approach. "Look, clearly things have escalated beyond what either of us intended," he said, attempting to sound reasonable. "Perhaps we should take a step back and consider mediation instead of an adversarial divorce, for the girls' sake." "Now you're concerned about the girls?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "After emptying their college funds and writing in your emails that they're not your priority anymore?" His eyes widened slightly, another piece of evidence he hadn't realized I possessed. "You've taken my words out of context." "We have the entire email chain, Mr. Chen," Diane interjected, "including Ms. Winter's concerns about whether Elizabeth would fight the divorce and your assurances that she would be easy to manipulate into a quick settlement." Michael's facade cracked entirely then, cold fury replacing his attempts at reasonableness. "You've gone through everything, haven't you? Invaded every aspect of my privacy." "I've discovered the truth," I corrected him. "There's a difference." He shook his head, a hint of his old condescending smile returning. "And what has the truth gotten you, Elizabeth? A costly legal battle? Public humiliation when all this becomes known? Is that really what you want?" "What I want," I said, rising from my chair to face him directly, "is justice. Not revenge, not punishment. Just what's fair. You can threaten me with financial hardship or social embarrassment, but those consequences pale compared to continuing. To live in ignorance while you steal our daughter's future." For a moment, something like respect flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by resignation, as he recognized the woman standing before him was not the compliant wife he could manipulate with threats and guilt. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," he said finally. "In the meantime, I'll need to collect some personal belongings." "Janet and I will accompany you upstairs," I replied, having anticipated this request, "to ensure compliance with the court order regarding removal of items." His jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly and headed for the stairs. After Michael had packed several suitcases under our watchful eyes and left the house, the full impact of the confrontation hit me. I sank back into my chair at the dining table, adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. "You were magnificent," Janet said, squeezing my shoulder. "Indeed," Diane agreed. "Most clients facing their first confrontation with a spouse like Michael struggle to maintain their composure. You've clearly found your strength remarkably quickly." I shook my head. "It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like survival." "That's exactly what it is," Robert affirmed. "And you're doing it well." The team continued discussing next steps, additional financial records to subpoena, pending court dates, strategies for negotiation. But my mind had already shifted to the challenges that would follow this initial victory. The twins would be home in a few hours, and I would need to explain their father's absence and the dramatic changes coming to our family. There would be financial pressures as the divorce proceeded, emotional fallout as friends and extended family learned of our situation, and the daunting task of rebuilding my professional identity after so many years. But for the first time, these challenges didn't seem insurmountable. The woman who had stood frozen in shock just 3 days ago when Michael threatened divorce had already begun to transform into someone stronger, someone capable of facing uncertainty with courage rather than fear. "One more thing you should know," Diane said as our meeting concluded. "The judge assigned to your case has a strong record of ruling against financial misconduct in divorce cases. Given the evidence we've gathered, I'm optimistic about securing not just a fair division of remaining assets, but potentially recovering significant portions of what Michael has diverted." "Thank you," I said, emotion finally breaking through my composed facade. "All of you. 3 days ago, I felt completely alone and overwhelmed. Today, I feel not okay exactly, but equipped to face whatever comes next." After everyone except Janet had left, I stood at the living room window, watching the familiar spring rain falling on our carefully landscaped front yard. For 18 years, I had believed I was building a life of security and mutual support with Michael. The foundation of that life had been shattered beyond repair, but from its ruins, I was beginning to construct something new, something entirely my own. My phone chimed with a text from Emma. "On our way home. Coach says we'll be there by 4. Love you, Mom." A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over me. Whatever rebuilding lay ahead would not be just for me, but for my daughters as well. They deserved to see their mother rise from betrayal with dignity and determination, to learn that a woman's worth is never determined by a man's assessment, that resilience can be born from even the deepest wounds. I texted back, "Can't wait to see you both. We have a lot to talk about, but we're going to be okay. Love you too." And for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal, I truly believed those words. We would be okay. Different, scarred perhaps, but ultimately stronger for having faced this crucible together. 6 months later. The real estate agent handed me the keys to my new townhouse with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Elizabeth. It's all yours." I clutched the keys tightly, feeling the tangible symbol of my new independence. The divorce had been finalized last month, with an outcome that exceeded even Diane's optimistic predictions. The judge had been furious at the evidence of Michael's financial misconduct, ordering not only an equitable division of remaining marital assets, but also requiring him to repay the funds he had diverted to purchase the San Diego condo. That property had been sold, with the proceeds divided according to the court's ruling. Michael and Vanessa's relationship had apparently not survived the financial setback and public exposure. According to mutual friends, he was now living alone in a rented apartment in Seattle, rebuilding his career at a smaller firm that had taken him on despite the damage to his reputation. The twins had just started their freshman year of college, Emma, at Oregon State University, following her interest in digital media, and Olivia at University of Washington on a volleyball scholarship. They were still processing their father's betrayal, each in her own way. Emma remained angry, keeping contact minimal, while Olivia maintained a cautious relationship with him, protective of her own hurt, but unwilling to sever ties completely. For me, the marketing skills I had feared were hopelessly outdated, had proven more resilient than I'd imagined. Carol Zhang had indeed offered me contract work, which had quickly expanded into a part-time position managing social media campaigns. For her company, I had also enrolled in digital marketing certification courses, updating my knowledge for the modern landscape. My new townhouse was modest compared to our family home, which had been sold as part of the divorce settlement, but it was entirely mine, the first property I had ever owned independently. The location was perfect, within walking distance of several shops and restaurants, with a small garden patio where I had already begun planting herb beds for the spring. "Would you like to go get a coffee to celebrate?" the real estate agent asked. "Or maybe something stronger?" I smiled. "Actually, I can't. I'm meeting my business advisor in an hour." The business advisor was actually a consultant helping me develop a business plan for my own boutique marketing agency focused on helping small businesses owned by women. It was still in the early planning stages, But the idea of combining my refreshed marketing skills with my desire to support other women in rebuilding their economic independence felt exactly right. As I drove to the meeting, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 months. The pain of Michael's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from an acute, debilitating wound to a dull ache that continued to fade with time. In its place had grown something unexpected, a profound appreciation for my own resilience and capabilities. Michael had threatened me with divorce after I questioned him about our emptied savings account, believing the prospect would terrify me into submission. Instead, it had become the catalyst for my liberation from a marriage built on deception and control. The woman who had once measured her worth through her husband's assessment now understood her own value. The mother who had feared failing her, daughters had instead shown them what courage looks like in the face of betrayal. The professional who had doubted her relevance had discovered that experience and wisdom have value that transcends time away from the workforce. As I parked outside, the coffee shop where I would meet my business advisor, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My hair was shorter now, a symbolic cutting away of my former life that had felt necessary and freeing. There were new lines around my eyes, evidence of both painful tears and genuine laughter. But mostly, I saw a confidence in my expression that had been absent for too many years. Michael had been wrong about everything that mattered. I wasn't nothing without him. I was finally everything I was meant to be.